It is not the government's job to censor information to a degree that parents do not have to parent their children. Hi, I'm Megan Myth, and I talk about a range of topics, mostly social and/or political commentary. Curiosity and critical thinking are good for everything. Asking why is a good thing.
Hi, Editing Megan here. I'll pop in a couple more times in this video, but I wanted to preface this video because I personally feel like there were a lot of things that I wanted to talk about but couldn't due to time constraints. If there's anything you'd like me to talk about more, please let me know, and I will do that.
We have made it through the introduction. Now we can start on page 1 at the foreword. This is going to take a while to get through because the foreword is 17 pages long. A Promise to America by Kevin D. Roberts, PhD. Can't forget that. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. Before we read any further, let's go back 44 years to 1980. This document was published in April 2023, so this could go back as early as 1978, depending on when this foreword was written. In a cursory look at Wikipedia, it looks like 1979 was the year that the Heritage Foundation came up with the idea for the Mandate for Leadership. The Heritage Foundation released the first Mandate for Leadership in January of 1981, and the Heritage Foundation claims that President Reagan adopted about 60% of the policies in the first iteration of the Mandate for Leadership.
Just a quick interjection here. I found a bit more than I expected in the New York Times archive. The Heritage Foundation was not exactly happy with Reagan at the time. Now, the Heritage Foundation praises the Reagan era as much as possible. Suddenly, Reagan isn't too liberal anymore.
This was the same period of time when the moral majority came to prominence. The moral majority is a huge topic, so I'm going to summarize this as succinctly as I can. The moral majority was a political organization slash movement that was founded in 1979 and officially dissolved about 10 years later. You can thank this movement for the stereotypical evangelical Christian conservative voting bloc becoming what it is today. Before the moral majority, Christians were not a voting bloc that politicians targeted the way they do now. The moral majority supported traditional family values, prayer in schools, teaching creationism in schools, and opposed the Equal Rights Amendment, gay rights, and abortion, among other things. Going back to the foreword, 44 years ago, a lot was happening for conservative politicians that they saw as positive progress. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. No. 44 years ago is when the conservative movement was getting its claws into the White House and permanently changing how we all interact with politics. The next paragraph says, "Today, America and the conservative movement are enduring an era of division and danger akin to the late 1970s. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging family budgets, drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries." This document alone is doing a discredit to the conservative movement, in my opinion. No one can deny that inflation is hitting everyone pretty hard, myself included. Inflation is a complicated issue and often has a slew of reasons that cannot be fixed with a single presidential policy. The CDC issued a report that drug overdose deaths decreased by 3% since 2018. So, no, overdose deaths are not continuing to escalate. Children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Okay, there's a lot to talk about here. I grew up in a conservative Christian household, and there was an ongoing theme of my parents projecting their own opinions as fact. In my opinion, what is happening here is the adults are using the idea of children's suffering to spur an emotional response. The adults are the ones that are really suffering in their minds because they hold these discriminatory and dehumanizing opinions. They can't present their opinions as they are because they know they will be chastised for them. Instead, they reframe this to make it so that children are suffering. This leads me to another point. One of the conservative platforms is government deregulation. And conservatives have called other countries nanny states in the past because to them there is too much regulation on too many things. So, I have to ask, how is regulating the information available to citizens deregulation? I'm referring to the conservative push to ban certain books in libraries or to get rid of libraries completely. Why is it not the parents' job to talk to and parent their children how they decide? And if a child disagrees with their parents when they get older, why is it the government's job to make sure they never have enough information to decide on things for themselves? Why is it the government's job to regulate libraries and suppress information? Why is it not the parents' job to explain things to their children if a question comes up? And if their children aren't talking to them about their lives, that's a whole different issue we won't get into here. Where is the parental responsibility? It is not the government's job to censor information to a degree that parents do not have to parent their children. Here's the line again. Children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Transgenderism and drag queens are separate things. Transgender people are still people, pure and simple. If we treated everyone with a minimum level of respect simply for being human, we would all be better off. You don't have to know someone or understand someone in order to give them a minimum level of respect. Drag queens are entertainment. They're an artistic expression. It is up to adults to parent their children about the world. The mere existence of drag queens does not equate to pornography. The existence of sex is not an affront to society. Newsflash, sex is how society continues to exist. Also, straight people are the only people contributing to the queer population. It is a disservice to everyone to pretend it doesn't exist or make it taboo. Not to mention giving accurate information to young people when it comes to their own bodies. I'll say it again. Where is the responsibility of adults to parent their children? I'm pretty sure they're referencing drag queen story hours here, which is when a drag queen reads a book to children for an hour in a library room. Parents are not required to bring their child to a drag queen story hour. Not only that, the conservative movement is trying to enforce their own view to abhor drag queens on everyone else. I have yet to see any person suffer negatively from having empathy for people who are not like them. Parental responsibilities need to be acknowledged and acted upon in order for freedom of choice to exist. If the government outlaws the choice to enjoy a drag queen show, my freedom of choice has been taken away. Continuing to the next part of this paragraph. Moreover, low-income communities are drowning in addiction and government dependence. Contemporary elites have even repurposed the worst ingredients of 1970s radical chic to build the totalitarian cult known today as the Great Awokening. And now, as then, the Republican Party seems to have little understanding about what to do. Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are in peril. Just a thought here. Would addiction and government dependence be so prevalent if there were places people could go to get help without having to stress about medical bills? Hmm? Or not having to worry about not getting paid from jobs that don't have paid time off if you're sick? Hmm? This is a good example of a self-reinforcing loop. If you can't work, you can't get paid. If you work a low-wage job that doesn't have medical leave, you can't afford treatment. Not being able to take off work or afford treatment is incredibly stress-inducing. which sets people up to make decisions that may be good in the short term, but bad in the long term. It's extremely difficult to get out of this cycle. Our healthcare system does not prioritize patients, it prioritizes payment. The elites that Kevin Roberts keeps referring to includes Kevin Roberts. He loves to name drop his high power friends.
My good friend Vivek Ramaswamy,
my wonderful colleague and friend Kara Frederick,
my friend Mark Howe,
Tim Carney's great work,
and he's become a good friend of mine, Peter Rex,
Republican leadership who are friends of ours,
my friend Dr. Matt Ladner,
friend and colleague Tom Spence, friends at the Wall Street Journal, my friend Dr. Jay Green.
The average person does not have friends like this. Republican leadership? I mean, come on. Kevin Roberts is good at glossing over the fact that he is an elite himself. He actively keeps the attention of his audience on something else, so they don't have time to think about who his friends are and what that means. He can't claim he didn't realize how elitist his friends are because he is name-dropping them intentionally. Now let's get back to radical chic.
The only people that would know what the 1970s radical chic is are people who are interested in history or those that lived through it. This reference is targeted toward an older generation, which tells me something. It means they are trying to mobilize a group of people that already agree with them. There is no attempt to convince anyone new that this is an issue they should be concerned about. Also, the phrase "the Great Awokening" is targeting the same group. This is the first time I've ever heard anyone refer to the Great Awokening. Maybe I'm out of the loop, but this is a first for me. Totalitarian, if you don't know what that means, is an authoritarian system of government. It's usually associated with a dictatorship and thought policing. The government controls all aspects of people's lives, including information they can access, like banning books in libraries, and how they can express themselves, like no drag queens allowed. So there are huge levels of hypocrisy going on here, because Kevin Roberts claims that the elites, which includes Kevin Roberts himself, have built a totalitarian cult, but it's conservatives and Project 2025 that are dictating what people can and cannot do or read. At the end of the paragraph, it says, "Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are in peril." This is purely to get an emotional reaction. What moral scale are they even using? It's their own warped conservative moral scale that they are trying to force on everyone else. Moving on. Yet, students of history will note that notwithstanding all those challenges, the late 1970s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself and the country and led the United States to historic political, economic, and global victories. As I mentioned earlier, the unification they're talking about is the creation of the moral majority. They are, once again, stating opinion as fact. Political, economic, and global victories is propping the US up with American exceptionalism. Again, I would argue that the economic changes during Reagan's presidency were not as victorious as they'd like to make it out to be. Now we're into page 2. Mandate for Leadership was published in January 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. By the end of that year, more than 60% of its recommendations had become policy. And Reagan was on his way to ending stagflation, reviving American confidence and prosperity, and winning the Cold War. The Heritage Foundation is the one that claims more than 60% of its recommendations were used, and they have good reason to exaggerate that number to make themselves look better. And the whole ending stagflation, reviving American confidence and prosperity is mostly opinion stated as fact. I looked into the details of Reagan's economic policies, and they weren't all that great. We're still feeling the negative effects of it today. This next portion is a little long, so stick with me. The bad news today is that our political establishment and cultural elite have once again driven America toward decline. The good news is that we know the way out, even though the challenges today are not what they were in the 1970s. Conservatives should be confident that we can rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left, at home and abroad. We did it before, and we'll do it again. As Ronald Reagan put it, Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. This is the duty history has put before us and the standard by which our generation of conservatives will be judged. And we should not want it any other way. The legacy of Mandate for Leadership, and indeed of the entire Reagan Revolution, is that if conservatives want to save the country, we need a bold and courageous plan. This book is the first step in that plan. You'd think this was the Bible, by the way this is worded. This is pulling on the self-righteous religious heartstrings of Boomer America. You'd think America was crumbling under our feet. But it's not. The economy is functioning, albeit not that great, but it's not great for anyone right now. And we are more accepting as a society of every type of person than we ever have been before now. And that's a great thing. Accepting and loving people, regardless of who they are and what they look like, is a wonderful thing that's good for everyone. But this romanticizes an outdated era that's full of toxic masculinity, sexism, and propping up white men and white men only. Moving on. The Conservative Promise. This volume, The Conservative Promise, is the opening salvo of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project, launched by the Heritage Foundation and our many partners in April 2022. More combative language with the opening salvo. Kevin Roberts is actively framing this as a war. If you only listen to people who talk in these terms, you're going to see the world in these terms. But I know the world I see on a daily basis is not the world they are describing. I know, with my own two eyes, that this culture war they keep talking about doesn't exist in the way they say it does. They are the ones claiming that there is a war. They are the ones claiming that they are victims. And sure, they have a right to say that, according to the Bill of Rights, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with them. And not agreeing with them does not mean I'm an enemy. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of intense political rhetoric going around. There definitely is. I'm saying that the vision of America that conservatives are presenting is not an accurate representation of this country if you just go look outside. They're dramatizing everything to create a sense of urgency and almost panic amongst their audience. If their audience is panicking, that audience is less likely to question whether or not what they are saying is actually true. It's using emotion to manipulate people. That's propaganda. How do you guys deal with the contrast of conservative messaging in the media and your personal experience on a daily basis? Is your experience more in line with what conservatives are describing, or is it different? Let me know in the comments. This is an agenda prepared by and for conservatives who will be ready on day one of the next administration to save our country from the brink of disaster. What disaster are they talking about? It's an amorphous, undefined thing that they're using to create a sense of urgency. Despite the fact that they have brought together so many authors and experts, a homogenous group of people who all believe the same thing will only say more of the same thing. A group of 400 racists are still racist. It doesn't matter how many you have. You will end up with the same result. Moving on. But as our dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially along 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. We've already established in a note on Project 2025, which I went over in my previous video, the link is in the description, that this work is divisive. And the authors know it. Their messaging is so fractured that even that alone can make someone feel uneasy and seek stability. And that person or group may latch on to the first thing they feel is familiar to them, whether or not it's a good thing. No one likes to feel uneasy or to panic. This is just a guess at someone's potential mentality when they're trying to absorb this, because even I'm getting whiplash, and I knew what I was getting into when I started this. I'm going to end this video here, but we'll pick back up where we left off in my next video in the Project 2025 series. You can find links to my sources in the video description. Thank you for choosing to spend time with me here. If you like this video, please like and subscribe below. You can click the bell to get notifications when I upload new videos, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope to see you again soon, and don't forget that asking why is a good thing.
That it?